Of course, a couple days removed from the election and a strange Thursday special Fed decision.
Yeah, what do you make of that? I almost said Wednesday earlier.
I know, it's kind of confusing here, but obviously they needed some distance from the election. But you got your 25 basis points, Tim.
You got your 25 basis points, and you also got a decision by the American voters. We were concerned that we wouldn't have a decision from the American voters by the time this Federal Reserve met and by the time that we heard from Jay Powell. So turns out they did a pretty smart thing by moving the day by 1 day.
Yeah, but Jay Powell was very, very careful, of course, to make clear he was not going to comment at all on the political situation or on what the incoming administration, what policy they might affect. So it was effectively a no comment through much of it. And the press conference was a lot shorter and a lot more tense, by the way, than what we typically see.
Isn't that notable that what we're talking about now is less about the path forward for rates, at least, and more about the way that he answered questions about what he would do if asked to resign or if other members of the Federal Reserve were asked to move aside?
And I think that's going to change in a material way, maybe not at the December meeting, but when we get to next year, because a lot of this is the monetary policy decisions are indeed going to be driven by the fiscal policy decisions, even if Jay Powell doesn't want to touch that. But he is going to have to address that, at least behind closed doors, most likely at that next December meeting. And my guess is it certainly was a topic of conversation in the two-day meeting that we just came out of here today. Meanwhile, let's walk you through the market action here on the day. Interesting price moves. We're well off the highs of the day, but the S&P 500 holding on to a record high, up about 40 points or about 0.7%. The NASDAQ composite and the NASDAQ 100 each up about 1.5% on the day. That's going to be good enough for a record high there. You see the Dow. The Dow had been trading at a record high for a good portion of the day. At one point, it was above right around that 43,800 level, but of course, it gave back a lot of that. And there you see the Russell sitting this one out a little bit, although it had shown a little bit of strength earlier in the session. Closing out the day, Tim, down 0.4%.
Hey, we're still in the midst of earnings season. It's not all about the Fed and the election. I'm watching what's going on over at Redfin right now. In terms of that outlook, the company sees a fourth quarter net loss between $25 and $32 million. That's coming above estimates of $24.1 million. The company says third quarter adjusted EBITDA came in at $3.95 million. Estimates were for $9.24 million. The company says third quarter revenue came in below estimates at $278 million. Estimates for $281.1 million. Shares right now bouncing around a little bit, but about 3% to the downside.
All right, I'm taking a look at Expedia because that company just came out with results as well. Third quarter adjusted EPS beating analyst estimates, $6.13, 3 cents higher than what was anticipated. Revenue came in a little bit lighter, $4.06 billion. Analysts were looking for $4.11 billion. But in terms of its full year guidance, Expedia, the online travel company, did raise its full year guidance. So we are looking at brighter skies, at least when it comes to the outlook, and that stock marginally higher. Actually, it's bouncing around at the moment here. There's also, in addition, a CFO transition as well taking place at the company.
Yeah, this is interesting too, and we should point out, I think we are expected to get some results out of Airbnb a little bit later tonight, so maybe we'll get a little bit more color here on the health of the travel industry. It gets to this idea, though, too, when we talk about the beneficiaries here of the big travel boom, that revenge travel, and whether that has ebbed. This raises a big question here, not so much about how they perform this quarter, but whether they can give some guidance longer term that will please investors. Tim?
Yeah. I mean, look, return of business travel, Airbnb certainly talked up the idea of people using Airbnb for business travel. The company itself has a policy of remote work. So in a sense saying, hey, you guys should do what we're telling everybody else to do. Yeah. But at the same time, since everyone is returning to the office, apart from Airbnb employees, does that affect the company?
Yeah, Airbnb was also very popular for people who were combining work trips with vacation trips because they were able to do more of that. And of course, as we go back to a more conventional work situation, that probably requires less of those long-term rentals at Airbnb places.
Yeah. That's why I was
surprised to see.
I was surprised to see Romaine today after a few days in Detroit doing election stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Not extending that trip? Or?
Yeah, trust me too, man. I tried to stay anyway. I was going to take a trip over to Windsor, Canada, but we need to take the trip right now into those earnings out of Airbnb. Crossing the wire right now, the red headline on the Bloomberg terminal is about the fourth quarter outlook. The company's seeing fourth quarter growth in nights booked above 8.5%. The street was looking for 7.7%. That's the guidance for the fourth quarter. For the quarter that we just ended, the third quarter, gross booking value coming in above estimates at $20.1 billion. EPS, $2.13. The street was looking for $2.15. Adjusted EBITDA above estimates at $1.96 billion. Revenue also coming in slightly above estimates here. And we're going to go back to the forecast here. So for the fourth quarter, they are saying that revenue in the fourth quarter, they're looking at a range of $2.39 to $2.44 billion. The street was looking for $2.42. So the top end of that range would beat that.
And just some commentary in the letter to shareholders. Airbnb saying that's building on robust momentum in September, off to a great start in the fourth quarter, citing strong demand trends across core as well as expansion markets. So again, to answer at least part of your question about what's going on in travel demand, so far, at least for a company like Airbnb, it looks like it has persisted.
I'm going to pose a question here, too, because it's interesting to see Expedia down, Airbnb up. And I think we had this conversation a few weeks ago when some other earnings were out. This idea that people aren't necessarily using these aggregator platforms to the same extent, that they're booking either directly through the airlines or through the hotel websites, or if you're a platform like Airbnb, maybe there. And I wonder if that has an effect on sites like Booking, Expedia, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, consumers sometimes, I know, face challenges when they're trying to change a ticket, now that it's easier to change a ticket if you do it through a third party versus if you're doing it right through that platform. One thing that I also took away from just a brief glance at Airbnb's release is about hosting versus staying using Airbnb. And you have to remember, this is a two-sided market here. Airbnb has to appeal to hosts to list their listings with the app, and also has to appeal to people looking for places to stay. What Airbnb is trying to do now is say that we want to make hosting as popular as actually traveling with Airbnb, as popular as staying in Airbnb, indicating to me that they're really trying to make the hosting experience better so people list with Airbnb rather than competing platforms.
All right, just a quick mention here of Lucid, the car maker, maintaining its full-year production forecast, still sees full-year production of about 9,000 vehicles. But for the third quarter, it did report a loss, an adjusted loss of 28 cents a share, slightly more narrow than what analysts had been anticipating. Revenue, $200 million. Analysts were looking for just under 197.
Speaking of EVs, Rivian also out with its results right now. 3Q production coming in at about 13,157 vehicles above estimates. Deliveries relatively in line at about 10,000. The company posting revenue of about $874 million. That's a miss. The street was looking for $980 million. And we're also learning right now that the company's loss per share coming in at about 99 cents a share. The street was looking for a loss of 92 cents a share. So a miss on revenue, a worse than expected loss per share. But at least right now, it does look like some of the production and delivery numbers came in either at or slightly above street estimates. Tim.
Okay, let's look at what's going on with Block, formerly known as Square. Third quarter net revenue coming in below estimates at $5.98 billion. Estimates were for $6.24 billion. The company sees a fiscal year adjusted EBITDA at $3 billion. It saw $2.9 billion. The estimate was for $2.92, so a beat there. The company also sees third quarter adjusted operating income at $1.56 billion. It saw $1.44 billion. The estimate was for $1.46 billion. Still shares moving lower in the after hours by about 7%.
All right, and we also have Pinterest, the social media network, reporting results. Let's start with the third quarter. Adjusted EBITDA, $242 million, beating the average analyst estimate, along with the third quarter adjusted EPS and revenue, also higher than anticipated. For the fourth quarter, this quarter, Pinterest sees revenue of anywhere from $1.13 billion to $1.15 billion. And at the high end, that matches the consensus estimate. So the outlook, certainly the range is lower than the median estimate. And in addition, its active users, monthly active users for the third quarter of 537 million. That is higher than what had been anticipated at 532.4 million.
Affirm out now with their results here. Of course, this is basically the fintech company, if you will. In the company's fiscal first quarter, revenue coming in at about $698 million. That's up 41% year over year and slightly above street estimates. Here's your guidance going forward, though. 2Q revenue, the company sees a range of 770 to 810 million. The street was looking for an average of about 783. Gross merchandise volume also expected to be slightly higher as well. Tim. All right, we actually got a few other earnings that we do want to get to here on a very busy day. Of course, a Fed day and a chance to catch up with some of the biggest investors out there. That does it for our cross-platform coverage of the market. Close on Bloomberg Television, Radio, and YouTube.